In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets hide in plain sight, Miss Jane Marple's knitting needles are more than tools for cozy scarves. They're weapons of truth, piercing a web of crime that threatens to unravel a community. When priceless jewels vanish, a will is forged, a poison strikes, and a hidden map surfaces, only one question burns. Who's pulling the strings? Is it a cunning stranger, a trusted ally, or someone closer still? As Miss Marple stitches clues from whispers and shadows, each click of her needles unravels a deeper deception. Will her quiet genius catch the mastermind before the final thread is cut? Or will St. Mary Mead fall to a silent predator? Dive into a tale where every loop holds a secret, and innocence is the deadliest disguise.
Chapter 1. The Whispered Stitch. The village of St. Mary Mead, nestled in the rolling hills of rural England like a forgotten jewel in a velvet pouch, its thatched roofs and cobblestone lanes whispering tales of simpler times. On this particular October afternoon in 1932, the air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, mingling with the faint aroma of baking scones from distant kitchens. At the heart of it all stood Rose Cottage, a modest abode with climbing ivy framing its diamond-paned windows, home to Miss Jane Marple, a spinster of indeterminate age, whose frail appearance belied a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. Miss Marple sat in her sun-dappled parlor, the room a cozy sanctuary of chintz armchairs and polished oak tables laden with porcelain teacups. Sunlight streamed through the mullioned glass, illuminating the delicate dance of dust motes in the air. In her hands, a pair of slender knitting needles glided through loops of fine merino wool, crafting an intricate cable pattern for a cardigan destined for her nephew's young daughter. The rhythmic clack-clack of the needles was her symphony, a soothing counterpoint to the world's chaos. She had always found knitting therapeutic, a way to order her thoughts amid the tangled skeins of human nature. Today, however, her tranquility was short-lived. A brisk knock echoed through the cottage, followed by the creak of the garden gate. Miss Marple set her work aside, adjusting her spectacles as she rose to answer. Standing on the threshold was Colonel Arthur Bantry, a retired military man with a mustache that bristled like a well-drilled hedge and eyes that sparkled with the remnants of imperial adventures. He was not her usual visitor, that honor typically went to his wife Dolly, but his presence suggested something amiss. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he boomed, his voice carrying the authority of parade grounds long left behind. "Dolly sent me. She's laid up with a touch of the grip, but she insisted I deliver the news personally. May I come in?" "Of course, Colonel. Do make yourself comfortable," she replied, ushering him into the parlor with a gracious smile. As he settled into the armchair, his bulky frame dwarfing the delicate furniture, Miss Marple poured tea from a steaming pot, adding a splash of milk just as he liked it. "Now, what has Dolly so eager to share? I trust it's not another of those dreadful bridge scandals." The colonel chuckled, a deep rumble that shook his teacup. "Worse than that, I'm afraid. It's the vicarage, robbed blind last night. Reverend Clements is in a right state. His late aunt's collection of jewels, you know the ones, that emerald necklace from her travels in Ceylon, a ruby ring said to have been a gift from a Maharaja, and a diamond tiara that's been in the family since Queen Victoria's Jubilee, all gone without a whisper. No broken locks, no footprints in the dew. The police inspector from Much Benham is scratching his head like he's got lice." Miss Marple's eyebrows arched slightly, her needles resuming their quiet tattoo against the wool as she absorbed the details. "How extraordinary! And the vicar, was he alone in the house?" "Alone? Hardly. There's the cook, Mrs. Hodges, who's been with him for donkey's years, The gardener, old Tom Price, who swears by his compost heap, and that new footman, Reginald, fresh from London, with airs above his station. Clements says he heard nothing unusual, just the owls hooting and the clock striking midnight. Wake up this morning to find the safe in his study ajar, the jewels vanished, like mist in the sun. As the colonel elaborated, painting vivid pictures of the vicarage's rambling corridors and shadowed attics, Miss Marple's mind wandered to parallels from her past. She recalled a distant cousin's mishap in Devon, where a missing brooch turned out to be hidden by a magpie with a penchant for shiny things. But this theft bore the hallmarks of human cunning, not avian whimsy. "Tell me, Colonel," she interjected gently, "has anyone noticed strangers in the village lately? Perhaps a traveling salesman or a wayward hiker?" He leaned forward, his mustache twitching. "Funny you should ask. Tom Price mentioned seeing a chap in a tweed cap loitering near the churchyard 2 days ago, sketching the gravestones or some such nonsense. Claimed to be an artist, but Price said his hands were too clean for charcoal work. And then there's the postman, young Wilkins, who's been acting queer, flushing red whenever the vicarage is mentioned. Dolly thinks it's all connected to that charity bazaar last month when the jewels were on display for fundraising." As their conversation meandered like the village brook, touching on local eccentricities, the spinster sisters who bred prize-winning cats, the blacksmith with a secret fondness for poetry, and the innkeeper whose ales were rumored to loosen tongues a bit too freely. By the time the colonel departed, promising to keep her updated, the sun had dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the parlor floor. Intrigued, Miss Marple decided a stroll was in order. Donning her sensible hat and a woolen shawl of her own making, patterned with delicate leaves that evoked the autumn foliage, she set off toward the vicarage. The path wound through orchards heavy with russet apples, where children scampered like squirrels, gathering windfalls in their aprons. She paused to chat with little Tommy Jenkins, the butcher's boy, who regaled her with tales of a ghostly figure he'd spied near the old mill. "All white and floaty, miss," he whispered, eyes wide as saucers. "Bet it's the thief's accomplice." Smiling indulgently, Miss Marple continued, her steps measured and thoughtful. The vicarage loomed ahead, a Gothic confection of pointed arches and ivy-cloaked walls, its gardens a riot of chrysanthemums in fiery hues. Reverend Clements himself answered her knock, his face etched with worry lines that aged him beyond his 50 years. "Miss Marple, what a balm to my soul! Please come in, the place is in uproar." He led her to the study, a book-lined haven, smelling of leather and pipe tobacco. The safe, a sturdy iron box bolted to the wall, gaped open like a toothless mouth. "See for yourself," he said, gesturing helplessly. "I locked it myself last night after prayers. The key was under my pillow, untouched." As they sipped restorative sherry, the vicar's one concession to nerves, Miss Marple's gaze roved the room. Papers scattered on the desk caught her eye. Sermon notes on forgiveness, interspersed with sketches of church repairs. But it was a small anomaly on the Persian carpet that snagged her attention. A faint scuff mark, as if from a boot heel, leading toward the French windows. Subtly, she steered the conversation. "Reverend, your staff, how long have they been with you? Loyalty can sometimes blind us to small indiscretions." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Hodges is like family. She'd sooner cut off her hand than steal. Tom Price grumbles about wages, but tends the roses with devotion. Reginald, well, he's new, ambitious, came with references from a London household, says he wants to learn the clergy ways, perhaps enter the seminary someday." Their talk turned philosophical, the vicar musing on the temptations of wealth in a world of want. Miss Marple shared an anecdote from her travels in Italy, where a pilfered relic from a cathedral turned out to be a forgery planted by a rival monk. Human motives are like your garden weeds," she observed. "They twist in unexpected directions." Excusing herself to admire the conservatory, Miss Marple wandered alone, her needles tucked in her reticule like concealed weapons. In the glass house, amid exotic ferns and blooming orchids, she encountered Reginald polishing silver trays. He was a handsome youth, with slicked-back hair and a tie knotted with urban precision. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his Cockney accent softened by practice. "Terrible about the jewels, innit? Makes a bloke wonder who's next." "Indeed," she replied, her tone mild. "You must see all sorts in City London service. Ever handle valuables like those?" He hesitated, a flicker in his eyes. "Once or twice, but I'm honest as the day is long. The vicar trusts me with the keys to the wine cellar even." As they conversed about city life versus village quietude, Reginald waxing poetic on the theatres of the West End, Miss Marple noticed a loose button on his cuff, dangling by a thread of mismatched cotton. It sparked a memory of her seamstress aunt, who could identify fabrics by touch alone. Casually, she offered, "Your button, dear. It's coming undone. Allow me to mend it quickly." With deft fingers, she produced her needles and thread from her bag, securing the button while subtly examining his sleeve. There, embedded in the fabric, was a shard of glass, glinting like a diamond chip. Not ordinary glass, faceted, perhaps from a jewel setting. Her heart quickened, but she kept her composure. Returning to the study, she bade the vicar farewell, promising to ponder the mystery. The walk home invigorated her, the evening air alive with the calls of roosting birds. Back at Rose Cottage,
She lit the lamps and prepared for her next move, a impromptu soirée. Invitations were sent via the village telegram boy to the vicarage staff, the colonel, sans Dolly, and a few select neighbors, under the pretext of planning a harvest supper. By 8 o'clock, the parlor brimmed with guests. Mrs. Hodges arrived first, her apron dusted with flour, bearing a tray of apple tarts. "Bless you, Miss Marple, for lifting our spirits," she said, her voice warm as fresh bread. Tom Price followed, his boots scrubbed clean, grumbling about rabbits nibbling his cabbages. Reginald sauntered in last, his polish undimmed by the day's drama. As tea flowed and conversations buzzed, topics ranging from the latest wireless broadcasts to the merits of mulching, Miss Marple observed keenly. The colonel regaled the group with tales of jewel heists in colonial India, where thieves disguised as holy men vanished into crowds. "Mark my words," he declared, "it's an inside job, always is." Seizing a lull, Miss Marple cleared her throat. "Speaking of insides, Reginald, your cuff button. I mended it earlier, but that glass shard in your sleeve, curious, isn't it? Reminds me of the prisms in the vicar's chandelier, or perhaps something more precious." The room fell silent. Reginald's face drained of color. I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Oh, but I think you do," she pressed gently, her needles clicking like a ticking clock. "You see, the safe wasn't forced. It was opened with a duplicate key. And that shard, from the ruby ring's setting, shattered in haste. You didn't steal for greed, did you? It was for love. That girl in London, the one who wrote those letters I glimpsed in your pocket when you bent to tie your shoe. Debts from her illness, perhaps?" Tears welled in his eyes. "How did you know? I only meant to borrow them, pawn them quick-like and replace with fakes, but the fence double-crossed me, took the lot and ran. I swear, I'll make it right." Gasps echoed, but the vicar, ever merciful, placed a hand on the youth's shoulder.
Confession is the first step to redemption, my boy. We'll involve the authorities, but perhaps leniency for your motives." As the evening wound down, the group dispersed with handshakes and promises of support. Reginald was escorted home under the colonel's watchful eye, the air cleared of suspicion's fog. Miss Marple locked her door, the fire dying to embers. The minor deception unraveled, a thread pulled loose, restoring tentative peace to the vicarage. Yet in the quiet she sensed the greater weave, a master thief still at large, their shadow lengthening over St. Mary Mead, awaiting the next twist in the pattern.
Chapter 2. Threads of Suspicion. The late October breeze swept through St. Mary Mead, stirring the golden leaves into miniature whirlwinds that danced across the village green. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the promise of the upcoming fete, a cherished annual affair where the villagers showcased their preserves, prize marrows, and hand-stitched quilts. Rose Cottage stood serene amid the bustle, its chimney puffing gentle curls of smoke as Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles weaving a delicate lace shawl. The rhythm of her work, click, loop, slide, was a meditation, each stitch a step closer to unraveling the mystery that lingered from the vicarage theft. Though young Reginald's confession had restored a fragile calm, the true orchestrator of the jewel heist remained a phantom, their silhouette haunting her thoughts. The fete was the perfect stage for observation, a vibrant tapestry of village life where secrets often slipped through careless lips. Miss Marple donned her best tweed coat, its russet hue blending with the autumn palette, and tucked her knitting into a capacious tapestry bag. The needles, polished to a gleam, were her silent allies, as unassuming as she, yet sharp enough to pierce deception. As she stepped onto the green, the scene unfolded like a painting. Stalls draped in bunting, children chasing balloons, and the scent of mulled cider wafting from the refreshment tent. Laughter mingled with the lively strains of a fiddler's tune, but beneath the merriment, Miss Marple sensed undercurrents of unease, whispers of the unsolved theft rippling through the crowd. She paused at Mrs. Weatherby's jam stall, where ruby jars gleamed like stolen gems. "Good morning, Eliza," Miss Marple said warmly, her eyes scanning the crowd over her spectacles. "The fete seems livelier than ever. Any talk of unusual visitors?" Mrs. Weatherby, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip sharper than her paring knife, leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial murmur. "Oh, Jane, you've hit the nail on the head. There's been chatter about a stranger at the Fox and Hound last night. A woman, all city polish with a hat so wide it could shade a horse. Ordered a brandy and asked pointed questions about Lady Harrington's estate. Said she was a historian, but her nails were manicured like a duchess's, and she tipped in gold sovereigns. Gold, Jane! Who carries those nowadays?" Miss Marple's needles paused in her bag, her mind snagging on the detail. Lady Harrington, the reclusive widow of Harrington Manor, was a figure of fascination in St. Mary Mead. Her estate, a sprawling pile of turrets and gargoyles, housed treasures rumored to rival the crown's, and her recent announcement of a revised will had set tongues wagging. Could this historian be linked to the vicarage theft, or was she chasing a different prize? "Fascinating," Miss Marple murmured, selecting a jar of gooseberry jam. "And what of the manor staff? Any new faces there?" Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed. "They say Lady Harrington's hired a new secretary, a Mr. Percival Sloane from London, sharp as a tack, with spectacles that make him look like an owl. Some reckon he's got his eye on more than ledgers, if you catch my drift." Thanking her,
Miss Marple drifted toward the handicraft tent, where quilts and embroidered cushions vied for attention. She lingered near a display of samplers, her fingers brushing a needlepoint rose as she overheard a heated exchange behind a partition. Two voices, low and urgent, belonged to Mr. Clarence Finch, the village solicitor, and a woman whose clipped tones suggested city breeding. "The will's airtight, Clara," Finch was saying. "Lady Harrington's signature's unmistakable. You're wasting your time." "It's not about the signature, Clarence. It's the timing. Why rewrite it now after years of leaving the estate to charity? Someone's pulling strings, and I'll wager it's that new secretary." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. A forged will was a thread worth pulling, especially in the wake of the jewel theft. She adjusted her shawl and stepped closer, pretending to admire a crocheted doily. The woman, Clara, presumably, emerged, her tailored coat and wide-brimmed hat matching Mrs. Weatherby's description. She was tall, with auburn hair coiled elegantly beneath her hat, and her eyes darted like a hawk's, scanning the crowd before she slipped away toward the tea tent. Determined to test her suspicions, Miss Marple devised a subtle gambit. She approached the tombola stall, manned by young Lily Baxter, the postmaster's daughter, whose nimble fingers sorted prize tickets with practiced ease. "Lily, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice as soothing as chamomile, "I've mislaid my scarf pin, a little silver thing shaped like a thistle. Might you keep an eye out? And while you're at it, have you noticed anyone lingering near Lady Harrington's stall?" Lily, eager to please, nodded vigorously. "I'll watch, Miss Marple. There's been a few odd sorts about, like that Mr. Sloane. He was poking around the Manor's display earlier, muttering about documents. Gave me the shivers he did with those cold eyes." Miss Marple thanked her and moved on, her knitting bag swinging lightly at her side. At the Manor's stall, Lady Harrington herself presided, a formidable figure in black silk, her silver hair swept into a chignon. She was showcasing a collection of antique books, their leather bindings embossed with gold. "Miss Marple, how delightful!" she said, her voice smooth as polished mahogany. "Care to bid on a first edition Dickens? All proceeds to the orphanage, of course." They chatted about literature, Miss Marple deftly steering the conversation toward estate matters. "I hear you've a new secretary, Lady Harrington. A London gentleman, is he? Must be a change from the village pace." Lady Harrington's smile tightened. "Mr. Sloane is efficient, if a tad ambitious. He's cataloging my late husband's papers. Quite a task, but I trust him implicitly." As they spoke, Miss Marple noticed Mr. Sloane himself approaching, a lean man with angular features and spectacles that magnified his pale eyes. He carried a ledger, its pages bristling with bookmarks. "Lady Harrington, the auctioneer needs your approval on the final lot," he said, his voice clipped and precise. His gaze flickered to Miss Marple, assessing, before he retreated. Seizing the moment, Miss Marple excused herself and followed at a discreet distance. Sloane paused near a secluded corner of the green, where a cluster of elms cast dappled shadows. There he met Clara, their heads bent in hushed conference. Miss Marple, hidden by a stall of homemade pies, strained to catch their words. "The will's been filed," Sloane whispered, "but the original, it's not what she thinks. Check the ink, Clara. It's the key." Ink. The word sparked a memory of her uncle's forgeries in Bath, where a clever clerk had used modern ink to mimic ancient deeds. If Lady Harrington's will was forged, it could redirect her fortune, perhaps to a conspirator's pocket. But how to confirm it without alerting the culprits? Miss Marple's fingers itched for action. She reached into her bag, her needles gleaming like miniature swords, and devised a plan.
At the tea tent, she orchestrated a minor mishap. Approaching Clara, who sipped tea alone, Miss Marple feigned a stumble, her knitting tumbling from her bag. "Oh, how clumsy of me!" she exclaimed, as Clara instinctively bent to help. In the chaos, Miss Marple's needle accidentally snagged Clara's sleeve, pulling loose a thread and revealing a smudge on her cuff, a faint blue stain, unmistakably ink. Not the kind used for everyday correspondence, but a specialized blend, perhaps for legal documents. "My apologies, dear," Miss Marple said, her eyes noting the stain's hue. "Such a lovely coat. I hope I haven't damaged it." Clara brushed it off, her smile tight. "No harm done, Miss Marple. Just a village spinster with a fondness for knitting." She smiled benignly, tucking her needles away. As Clara hurried off, Miss Marple's mind raced. The ink suggested Clara's involvement in document tampering, but was she the mastermind or a pawn? And how did Sloane fit in? That evening, Miss Marple invited the village solicitor, Mr. Finch, to her cottage for a private consultation, ostensibly about her own modest will. Over sherry and shortbread, she probed delicately. "Clarence, you've handled Lady Harrington's affairs for years. Her new will? All in order, I presume? No irregularities in the signatures or ink?" Mr. Finch frowned. "Irregularities? None that I've seen. The will's on vellum, signed in her presence last week."
Finch, a portly man with a penchant for tweed waistcoats, frowned. "Irregularities? None that I've seen. The will's on vellum, signed in her presence last week. Sloane witnessed it, along with the butler. Why do you ask?" "Oh, just an old woman's curiosity," she said airily. "But I've heard of forgers using special inks to mimic age. You'd spot such a thing, wouldn't you?" His eyes narrowed, a spark of unease flickering. "I'd like to think so. I'll review the document tomorrow, just to be sure." The next morning, Miss Marple visited the local stationer, Mr. Pym, whose shop smelled of parchment and sealing wax. "Mr. Pym, have you sold any unusual inks lately? Perhaps a blue-black blend, suitable for legal work?" Pym, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, nodded. "Funny you mention it. That city lady, Miss Clara, bought a bottle of archival ink last month. Said it was for restoring old manuscripts. Paid in cash, no questions." Armed with this, Miss Marple orchestrated a final gambit. She hosted a knitting circle at Rose Cottage, inviting Lady Harrington, Mr. Finch, and, through a carefully worded note, Clara, under the guise of discussing fate proceeds. Sloane, she learned, was away on business in London. As the group gathered, needles clicking like a chorus of crickets, Miss Marple steered the talk to legacies. "Lady Harrington, your generosity to the orphanage is inspiring. Your new will ensures it, I hear." Lady Harrington nodded, her eyes softening. "Indeed, it's my duty to secure their future." Miss Marple set down her knitting, her voice gentle but firm. "And yet, I wonder if that future is at risk. Clara, dear, that ink on your cuff, archival blue-black, isn't it? The kind used for Lady Harrington's will? And Mr. Finch, when you rechecked the document this morning, did you notice the ink's sheen? A modern blend, not the iron gall of older wills." Clara froze, her teacup clattering. Finch sputtered. "How did you—" "I tested it today. The ink's a fraud. The will's a forgery, meant to divert funds to an offshore account." The room erupted in gasps. Clara, cornered, stammered, "It wasn't my idea. Sloane, he planned it. I only followed orders, supplied the ink. He said no one would notice."
Lady Harrington's face hardened. Sloane? My trusted secretary? This is betrayal. Miss Marple's needles resumed their dance, a calm counterpoint to the chaos. Not betrayal, Lady Harrington, but greed. Sloane likely saw your wealth as his ticket to a new life. Clara was his instrument, but the true forger remains at large. Sloane himself, I suspect, is our jewel thief's mastermind, tying these crimes together. As Finch promised to alert the authorities and Lady Harrington vowed to secure her estate, the knitting circle disbanded, the forged will exposed, and the young heir safeguarded. Clara, contrite, agreed to testify against Sloane, who had fled to London, leaving only whispers of his schemes. Miss Marple sat alone by her fire, her shawl nearly complete, its lace pattern a map of the day's triumph. Yet the shadow of Sloane lingered, a thread still loose in the village's fabric, promising darker intrigues to come.
Chapter 3. The Tangled Web. November draped St. Mary Mead in a shroud of mist, the village's thatched roofs glistening like silver under a low, pewter sky. The air was sharp with a tang of wood smoke and frost-kissed leaves, a reminder that winter loomed just beyond the horizon. Inside Rose Cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by her hearth, the fire casting a warm glow on the walls adorned with faded watercolors of her travels. Her knitting needles wove a pair of mittens, their intricate Fair Isle pattern a testament to her patience and precision. Each stitch was a meditation, a way to untangle the threads of deceit that had woven through the village since the vicarage's theft and the forged will at Harrington Manor. Though young Reginald's confession and Clara's exposure had brought partial justice, the elusive Mr. Percival Sloane, Lady Harrington's treacherous secretary, remained a specter, his schemes linking the crimes like a spider's web. The latest disturbance came with the Morning Post, delivered by a shivering Lily Baxter who lingered at the door with wide eyes. "Miss Marple, it's dreadful news," she gasped, clutching her scarf against the chill. "Mr. Harrow, the innkeeper at the Blue Boar, was taken ill last night. Poison, they're saying. He collapsed right in the middle of serving ale, frothing at the mouth like a mad dog. The doctor's with him now, but folk are whispering it's no accident." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze sharpening behind her spectacles. "Poison, you say? How extraordinary! And Mr. Harrow, was he at odds with anyone? The Blue Boar is a lively place. Grudges can fester over a pint." Lily nodded, her cheeks flushed. He'd been arguing with Miss Beatrice, Lady Harrington's maid, over some unpaid tab. She was in the inn last week, all high and mighty, saying she'd see him ruined. But poison, that's wicked, isn't it? Thanking Lily with a peppermint from her tin, Miss Marple pondered the news. The Blue Boar, a timbered inn at the village's heart, was a hub of gossip and intrigue, its oak-paneled walls soaking up secrets like ale into a bar rag. Mr. Harrow, a jovial man with a beard like a briar patch, had no shortage of admirers but also enemies, rival publicans, spurned suitors, or perhaps someone tied to Sloane's machinations. The link to Lady Harrington's household was too conspicuous to ignore. Beatrice, the maid, was a new thread in the pattern, and Miss Marple intended to tug it gently. Determined to investigate, she wrapped the mittens in tissue and donned her heaviest shawl, its wool dyed a deep mulberry that blended with the dusk. The walk to the Blue Boar was brisk, the village quiet save for the distant bark of a fox. The inn sign creaked in the wind, its painted boar glowering as if guarding the secrets within. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued, the usual raucous laughter replaced by hushed murmurs. Dr. Haydock, the village physician, stood by the bar, his bag open and his face grim as he conferred with Mrs. Harrow,
the innkeeper's wife, whose apron was crumpled from anxious twisting. "Miss Marple," Dr. Haydock greeted, his voice low. "A bad business, this. Harrow's stable, thank heavens. Arsenic, I suspect, although I've sent samples to the chemist in Much Benham. He ingested it in his supper, a mutton stew. The kitchen's in chaos, blaming each other." Mrs. Harrow, her eyes red-rimmed, chimed in. "It's that Beatrice, I'll wager. She was here yesterday demanding a private room for some lady friend from London. Left a right mess, too. Spilled wine on the tablecloth, and I found a vial under her chair after she left. I thought it was perfume, but now—" Miss Marple's mind raced. Arsenic was a poisoner's classic, subtle yet deadly, often concealed in food or drink. Beatrice's connection to Lady Harrington suggested a deeper motive, perhaps revenge, or a cover for Sloane's broader scheme. "May I see the vial, Mrs. Harrow?" she asked, her tone gentle as a lullaby. The vial, a tiny glass bottle with a cork stopper, lay on the bar, its contents long since discarded. Miss Marple examined it through her spectacles, noting a faint residue clinging to the glass. "Curious," she murmured. "Might I borrow this for a day? I'll return it promptly." With the vial tucked safely in her bag, nestled among her knitting, Miss Marple resolved to turn her weekly knitting circle into a subtle inquisition. The group, comprising Mrs. Weatherby, the jam-maker, Miss Clara Tilling, the postmistress, and now, by careful invitation, Beatrice herself, would convene at Rose Cottage that evening. The pretext was a charity drive for winter blankets, but Miss Marple's true aim was to weave a trap with words and wool. By 7 o'clock, the parlor was aglow with lamplight, the air fragrant with lavender scones and Earl Grey tea. Mrs. Weatherby, her tongue as tart as her preserves, regaled the group with tales of the fete success, while Miss Tilling lamented the rising cost of postage stamps. Beatrice, a wiry woman with sharp cheekbones and a guarded demeanor, sat on the edge of her chair, her fingers fidgeting with a handkerchief embroidered with violets. Miss Marple, her needles clicking a steady rhythm, steered the conversation toward the inn. "Such a shock about Mr. Harrow," she said, her voice soft as the wool in her hands. "Poison is so personal, don't you think? It requires a certain intimacy, knowing someone's habits. Beatrice, you've been to the Blue Boar often, haven't you? Serving Lady Harrington's guests, perhaps?" Beatrice's eyes darted to the fire. "Only now and then, miss. Her ladyship likes her privacy, but she sends me for errands. I was there yesterday, fetching wine for a guest, a Miss Langley from London." Miss Marple's needles paused, a deliberate hitch in the pattern. "Miss Langley, you presume? The historian with the wide-brimmed hat. Mrs. Weatherby mentioned her at the fete. Quite the curious visitor." Mrs. Weatherby nodded vigorously. "That's the one. Paid in sovereigns, bold as brass. I saw her chatting with Beatrice outside the inn, thick as thieves." Beatrice flushed, her handkerchief twisting tighter. "Just passing the time of day, that's all. She was asking about the manor's history, nothing more." Sensing a fraying thread, Miss Marple reached into her bag, producing the vial with a flourish disguised as clumsiness. "Oh dear, I almost forgot. I found this at the inn, near where you sat, Beatrice. It's not perfume, is it? Dr. Haydock suspects arsenic, and I couldn't help but notice your hands, dear. They're so steady for embroidery, yet they tremble now." The room stilled, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Beatrice's face drained of color, her voice a whisper. I didn't mean harm. It was Miss Langley's idea. She said Harrow was meddling, asking questions about her visits to the manor. She gave me the vial, told me to slip it into his stew, just a pinch, to make him ill, not kill him. I owed her a favor from years back in service together." Miss Tilling gasped, her teacup clattering. Mrs. Weatherby's jaw dropped, her gossip-hungry eyes wide. Miss Marple, however, remained serene, her needles resuming their dance. "A favor, you say? And Miss Langley, where's she now?"
Gone. She choked out. Left for London this morning. Said she'd be back when the dust settled. She's working for someone powerful. I heard her mention a name. Sloane. The name hung like a thundercloud. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. Mr. Sloane, the secretary who fled after the forged will. Interesting. And this vial, your favor to Miss Langley, ties you to his web, Beatrice. But confession is a start. Tell us everything, and perhaps the law will be lenient. Beatrice broke down, tears streaming as she recounted her story, a debt from her youth when Miss Langley, then a governess, had covered for her after a theft gone wrong. The vial, supplied by Langley, was meant to silence Harrow's suspicions about her late-night visits to the manor, where she'd been gathering documents for Sloane. The poison was a warning, not a murder attempt, but it had spiraled out of control. Miss Marple listened, her mittens growing under her hands, each stitch a marker of truth revealed. She sent for Dr. Haydock and Constable Polk, who arrived swiftly, their boots thudding on the cottage floor. Beatrice, trembling but resolute, repeated her confession, agreeing to testify against Langley and Sloane. The vial, now in Polk's custody, would be analyzed, its residue a damning link to the crime. As the knitting circle dispersed into the foggy night, Mrs. Weatherby promising to spread the news with her usual zeal, Miss Marple escorted Beatrice to the door. "You've done right, dear," she said softly. "The truth, like good wool, holds strong under strain." Alone again, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her mittens nearly complete, their pattern a map of the evening's revelations. The Blue Boar was safe, Harrow recovering, and Beatrice's confession had snipped another thread in Sloane's intricate web. Yet the mastermind remained at large,
his tendrils stretching from the vicarage to the manor to the inn. As the fire died to embers, Miss Marple's needles clicked on, a quiet promise to pursue the shadow that still loomed over St. Mary Mead, its secrets waiting to be unpicked.
Chapter 4. Needles in the Haystack. Winter's icy breath had settled over St. Mary Mead by mid-December, frosting the hedgerows and turning the village's cobblestone lanes into glistening ribbons under the moon. Rose Cottage glowed like a lantern in the dusk, its windows aglow with the warmth of a crackling fire. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a tartan shawl of her own making, sat by her hearth, her knitting needles crafting a pair of thick woolen socks, their cables twisting like the mysteries she pursued. The vicarage theft, the forged will, and the poisoning at the Blue Boar had each unraveled under her gentle probing, yet the shadow of Percival Sloane, the cunning secretary, loomed larger than ever. His web of deceit stretched across St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple sensed the stolen jewels, still missing, held the key to trapping him. The village buzzed with preparations for a clandestine auction at Harrington Manor, where Lady Harrington, stung by betrayal, had decided to sell off lesser heirlooms to bolster her estate's coffers. The event, whispered about in hushed tones, was by invitation only, a gathering of wealthy collectors and discreet dealers from London and beyond. Miss Marple, ever the unobtrusive observer, secured an invitation through a distant cousin, a retired auctioneer, with a fondness for her damson preserves. The auction promised a stage where secrets might surface, and she intended to be there, her needles as sharp as her wits. On the evening of the auction, the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the manor's leaded windows. Miss Marple arrived in a borrowed fur stole, its silver fox lending her an air of understated elegance. Her knitting bag, slung over her arm, concealed her needles and a small notebook for jotting observations. The manor's great hall was a spectacle of opulence. Chandeliers dripped with crystal, their light glinting off polished mahogany and ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every guest. The attendees, a mix of tweed-clad gentry and sleek city types, sipped champagne and murmured over the catalogue, which listed silver candelabra, rare porcelain, and a curious lot, a faded tapestry said to depict a medieval hunt. Miss Marple drifted among the crowd, her ears attuned to snippets of conversation. A portly man in a velvet vest boasted of his collection of Mughal daggers, while a woman in emerald silk speculated about Lady Harrington's financial straits. Near the tapestry, displayed on a velvet-draped easel, Miss Marple noticed a wiry gentleman with a monocle, his fingers twitching as he studied the faded threads. His intensity was peculiar. The tapestry, though old, was hardly the auction's prize. Intrigued, she sidled closer, pretending to adjust her stole. "Exquisite work, isn't it?" she remarked, her voice as soft as the wool in her bag. "The detail in the hounds almost lifelike." The man, startled, adjusted his monocle. "Indeed, madam, a rare piece, though its value lies in subtleties. I'm Mr. Gideon Vane, antiquarian. And you are?" "Jane Marple, just a village spinster with a fondness for old crafts," she replied, her smile disarming. "Have you a particular interest in tapestries, Mr. Vane?" He hesitated, his eyes darting to the crowd. "One might say I collect stories woven in thread. This piece, rumored to hide secrets of the Harrington lineage, a map, perhaps, to forgotten treasures." Her pulse quickened. A map? Could it link to the stolen jewels? She thanked him and moved on, her needles itching for action. At the refreshment table, she encountered Lady Harrington, resplendent in sapphire velvet, her composure a mask for recent betrayals. "Miss Marple, you grace us with your presence," she said, her voice warm but strained. "I trust you'll find something to bid on." "Oh, I'm here to observe," she replied, her eyes twinkling, "though that tapestry caught my eye. Such an unusual lot for an auction of this caliber." Lady Harrington's smile faltered. "A whim of my late husband's. He claimed it held family secrets, but I never saw the value. Still, it's drawn curious bidders." As the auction began, Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her knitting in her lap. The auctioneer, a florid man with a voice like a foghorn, rattled through lots with practiced ease. Silver went for a song, porcelain sparked a bidding war, but when the tapestry was announced, a hush fell. Mr. Vane, his monocle glinting, opened with a startling bid, £500, far above its estimated worth. A murmur rippled through the room, and a second bidder, a woman in a veiled hat, countered fiercely. The price soared to 1,000, then 2, the tension palpable. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind racing. Why such fervor for a faded cloth? She recalled a tale from her youth of a smuggler's map sewn into a quilt, revealed only under candlelight. Excusing herself, she slipped into the manor's library, where the tapestry had been stored before the auction. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, but her fingers, trained by years of needlework, probed the fabric's edges. There, beneath a loose hem, she felt an anomaly, a stiff, parchment-like patch sewn into the lining. With a deft prick of her needle, she loosened a thread, revealing a folded square of vellum. Unfurling it under the lamp, she saw a crude map, a sketch of Harrington Manor's grounds, with an X marking a copse near the old dovecote. Her heart leapt, the jewels, perhaps, buried to evade detection. But time was short. The auction's climax neared, and Vane's bid suggested he knew the tapestry's secret. Returning to the hall, she caught the eye of Colonel Bantry, also in attendance, his mustache bristling with curiosity. Whispering her discovery, she enlisted his aid. "Arthur, we must act swiftly. That tapestry hides a map to the stolen jewels. I suspect Mr. Vane is Sloane's agent, sent to secure it." The colonel, ever game for intrigue, nodded.
"Leave it to me, Jane. I'll keep an eye on him." As the tapestry was hammered down to Vane for a staggering 3,000 pounds, Miss Marple slipped out, her shawl drawn tight against the wind. The Dovecote, a crumbling stone structure on the manor's edge, was a half-mile trek through frosted fields. Armed with a lantern from the manor's porch and her trusty needles, she navigated the moonlit path, her breath puffing in clouds. The copse loomed, its skeletal trees clawing at the sky. Kneeling by the dovecote's base, she probed the earth, her fingers brushing a metal box buried shallowly beneath roots. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the vicarage jewels, the emerald necklace, ruby ring, and diamond tiara, their facets winking like stars. But as she secured the box in her bag, a shadow moved, a figure in a dark coat, his monocle catching the lantern's glow. Vane. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "You're more resourceful than I expected. Hand over the box, and we'll part amicably." Her needles gleamed in her hand, a quiet threat. "Mr. Vane, I think not. You're working for Sloane, aren't you? The tapestry was his clue to the jewels, hidden until he could retrieve them." His smile was cold. "Clever, but naive. Sloane's plans are grander than you imagine. The jewels are a mere stepping stone. Step aside, or—" The crunch of boots interrupted him. Colonel Bantry emerged, his old service revolver glinting. "That's enough, Vane. Hands up, or I'll shoot." Outnumbered, Vane froze, his monocle slipping. Miss Marple, calm as ever, bound his wrists with a length of yarn from her bag, its strength surprising him. "Knitting is practical, Mr. Vane," she said mildly. "Now let's return to the manor." Back in the great hall, the auction had ended, guests dispersing into the night. Lady Harrington, alerted by the colonel, gasped at the recovered jewels. "Miss Marple, you're a marvel, but how did you know?" "A hunch, my dear," she replied, her needles clicking as she resumed her socks. "The jewels weren't valuable in their threads, but what they concealed. Mr. Vane, I suspect, was Sloane's eyes, sent to secure the map before it fell to another." Constable Polk arrived, summoned by a breathless footman, and took Vane into custody. The antiquarian, defiant at first, crumbled under questioning, admitting his role as Sloane's intermediary. The jewels, he confessed, were to fund Sloane's escape abroad, part of a larger scheme to fleece the manor's wealth. The village celebrated the recovery, toasting Miss Marple with mulled wine as the manor's chandeliers blazed. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Miss Marple walked home, the socks nearly complete in her bag. The jewels were safe, Vane apprehended, and the village breathed easier, its harmony restored. Yet Sloane remained a ghost,
his shadow slipping through her grasp. Sitting by her fire, she knitted on, each stitch a vow to pursue the puppet master, whose web still quivered with uncaught threads, waiting for her needles to pierce the final knot.
Chapter 5. The Final Pearl. Spring had kissed St. Mary Mead awake, coaxing primroses from the earth and painting the orchards with delicate pink blossoms. The village, nestled in its verdant cradle, hummed with the promise of renewal, yet an undercurrent of unease lingered from the winter's turmoil. The vicarage theft, the forged will, the poisoning at the Blue Boar, and the recovered jewels from Harrington Manor's hidden map had each been unraveled by Miss Jane Marple's deft touch. But Percival Sloane, the shadowy architect of these crimes, remained a phantom, his absence a taunt to her relentless curiosity. As she sat in Rose Cottage, her knitting needles crafting a delicate baby blanket for a neighbor's newborn, the soft click of ebony against wool was a metronome to her thoughts. The blanket's pattern, a lattice of interlocking hearts, mirrored the intricate web she sought to dismantle.
The grand ball at Harrington Manor, scheduled for the first Saturday in April, promised to be the season's pinnacle, a glittering affair to celebrate the manor's restored fortunes and Lady Harrington's resolve to move forward. Invitations, embossed with gold, had arrived at every notable doorstop in St. Mary Mead, including Miss Marple's. She saw the event as a final stage, a chance to draw Sloane, or his proxy, into the open. Her needles paused as a plan formed, as delicate yet unyielding as the blanket in her hands. On the evening of the ball, Rose Cottage glowed with the soft light of oil lamps, their flicker casting shadows that danced like conspirators. Miss Marple dressed carefully, choosing a gown of dove-gray silk, its simplicity offset by a cameo brooch that gleamed with quiet authority. Her knitting bag, ever present, held her needles, a skein of white wool, and a small surprise. A folded note slipped under her door at dawn, its cryptic message inked in a hand she suspected was Sloane's. "The final thread is cut tonight. Seek the rose." The words, enigmatic yet taunting, suggested a bold move, perhaps his last in St. Mary Mead. She tucked the note beside her needles, her heart steady as she stepped into the night. Harrington Manor was ablaze with light, its turrets silhouetted against a star-strewn sky. Carriages lined the drive, their horses snorting clouds of steam into the crisp air. Inside, the ballroom sparkled, its parquet floor polished to a mirror's sheen, chandeliers dripping with prisms that fractured light into rainbows. Guests in silks and tailcoats swirled to a waltz, their laughter mingling with the strains of a string quartet. Miss Marple, blending seamlessly with the crowd, moved with the grace of a shadow, her eyes scanning for clues. The rose, she mused, perhaps a literal flower, a motif, or a code. She paused by a refreshment table laden with crystal flutes and tiered cakes, her knitting bag discreetly at her side. Colonel Bantry, resplendent in a dress uniform that strained slightly at the waist, approached with a grin. "Jane, you look positively regal. Care to dance, or are you hunting bigger game tonight?" She smiled, her needles clicking softly in her bag. "No dancing for me, Arthur, but I'd welcome your sharp eyes. Have you noticed anything unusual? A guest out of place, perhaps, or a mention of roses?" The colonel's mustache twitched. "Funny you should say that. Lady Harrington's wearing a rose-shaped diamond brooch tonight. Gift from her late husband," she said. "And there's a chap in the library, a Mr. Carver, who's been asking about her private papers. Claims he's a biographer, but he's got the look of a fox in a henhouse." Her interest piqued, she drifted toward the library, a wood-paneled sanctuary lined with leather-bound tomes. There, Mr. Carver, a lean man with a hawkish nose and a cravat tied with ostentatious flair, pored over a ledger, his fingers tracing entries with undue intensity. She entered, feigning a search for a book. "Good evening, Mr. Carver," she said, her voice as soft as the wool in her bag. "Researching the Harringtons' history. Their library is a treasure trove." He started, snapping the ledger shut. "Miss Marple, is it?" "Yes, just gathering notes for a biography. Lady Harrington's life is fascinating." "Indeed," she replied, her eyes noting a smudge of ink on his cuff, its hue matching the note in her bag. "Her legacy is much discussed, especially her recent troubles. You've heard of the thefts and forgeries, I presume?" Carver's smile was thin. "Village gossip travels fast. I'm more interested in her philanthropy than her scandals." As they spoke, Miss Marple's fingers brushed her knitting, a pretext to linger. She excused herself to rejoin the ball, but not before slipping a tiny skein of wool behind a bookcase, a marker for later investigation. Back in the ballroom, she sought Lady Harrington, who stood near the orchestra, her rose brooch glinting like a beacon. "My dear, that brooch is exquisite," Miss Marple said, her tone admiring. "A family heirloom, I gather?" Lady Harrington touched it fondly. Yes, my husband's last gift before he passed. It's more sentimental than valuable, though it's been caused a stir tonight. Several guests have inquired about its provenance." The comment sparked a theory. The note's mention of a rose, Carver's ink-stained cuff, and Sloane's absence suggested a final gambit. Miss Marple recalled a case in her youth where a coded message hidden in jewelry had led to a smuggler's downfall. Could the brooch conceal Sloane's endgame? She needed to act swiftly. Orchestrating a diversion, she approached the orchestra leader during a pause, whispering a request for a lively polka to draw the crowd to the dance floor. As couples swirled, she slipped back to the library, her needles at the ready. There, she found Carver rifling through a locked drawer, a small tool in his hand. "Mr. Carver, how industrious," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Searching for something specific? Perhaps a clue to the rose?" He spun, his face paling. "You're meddlesome, old woman. This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does," she countered, her needles gleaming. "That ink on your cuff matches a note I received, penned by Sloane, I believe. You're his final pawn, sent to retrieve a secret hidden in Lady Harrington's brooch, a ledger, perhaps, detailing his illicit accounts." He lunged, but Miss Marple was prepared. With a flick of her wrist, she looped a length of wool around his hand, tangling his fingers like a fly in a web. "Knitting is versatile, Mr. Carver," she said calmly. "Now let's have no fuss." The commotion drew Colonel Bantry and Constable Polk, who had been patrolling the grounds. Carver, trapped, confessed under pressure. Sloane had hidden a microfilm in the brooch's setting, a record of his financial schemes, including the jewel theft and forged will. He'd planned to retrieve it tonight, using Carver as his agent, before fleeing to the continent. The note was his taunt, a dare to Miss Marple to catch him. With Carver in custody, Miss Marple presented her findings to Lady Harrington, who removed the brooch with trembling hands. Under a jeweler's loupe, provided by a guest, they found the microfilm, its tiny script detailing Sloane's network of accomplices and hidden accounts. The ballroom, now hushed, buzzed with awe as Miss Marple unveiled her pièce de résistance, a knitted replica of Sloane's web, crafted over weeks, its threads mapping each crime, the vicarage, the manor, the inn, and now the brooch. Each knot represented a suspect, each loop a clue, culminating in Sloane's name at the center. Lady Harrington, her voice choked with gratitude, declared, "Miss Marple, you've saved my honor and my estate. Sloane will face justice." Constable Polk, armed with the microfilm, dispatched telegrams to London, where Sloane was apprehended at a dockside hotel, his escape thwarted. The ball resumed, its mood transformed to one of triumph, guests toasting Miss Marple with champagne as the quartet played a triumphant march. She declined the spotlight, retreating to a quiet corner to finish her blanket, its hearts now complete. As dawn painted the sky in hues of apricot and lavender, Miss Marple walked home, the village awaking to a new day. At Rose Cottage she brewed a pot of tea, its steam curling like the mysteries she had unraveled. The blanket, folded neatly, was a gift for the future, much like the peace she had restored. Sloane's arrest closed the final loop, his web dismantled, leaving St. Mary Mead to bask in its hard-won serenity. Her needles, now resting in their case, had proven deadlier than any blade, piercing the heart of darkness with the quiet strength of truth. As she sipped her tea, the village stirred outside, whole and hopeful, its secrets safely tucked away, like wool in a basket.